Good day and welcome. Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports. Patriotism in action, putting America first, New World Order dead last. The Constitution reigns supreme here. So glad you can be with us. Let's pick up where we left off. And that was straw polls, that was polling in general, popularity for the GOP 2012 nomination. And just to refresh your memory, there was, well, I guess you'd have to say that there was some surprises in kind of a shakeup, if you will, as to who seems to be reigning most popular, who seems to be on an absolute run or tear. And so the orthodoxy or the status quo has been shaken to its roots. But again, it's sort of like the way the wind blows in Amarillo, Texas, or in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, among other places. I mean, it could be east, west, north, south. So by taking the temperature, say doing a barometer reading, or the pulse of the nation, generally the reins are pulled in. The major media and corporate and political interest, have a consensus, and their choice, and they'll always have a backup plan, will be the one that will be implanted. Okay, that will be, ingrained or infused into the political scheme of things. Now, those that follow Ron Paul, and I think Ron's the best of the pack, even though I have some misgivings, and we've talked about that before, he's the closest resembling a liberty or freedom-related candidate who is very outspoken about ending the Fed and its ruinous reign of our monetary system, and also pulling back from these godforsaken, endless wars and occupation by an imperious power that we've become because of the New World Order, NWO. But when this all shakes out, and I think it's almost inevitable, although we should still fight the good fight, those of you that are still interested in saving the republic in terms of its a national government, and in terms of a United States to some degree, Romney, in all likelihood, will be the Republican standard bearer. And in all likelihood, I believe he's capable, based on his transformation, this chameleon of a candidate. I believe he will be the next president of the United States. I think Obama, and I've had to change my view on this. I said that even with, the dour and dipping ratings and popularity and ineffectual nature of Obama, that he would probably sneak in for a second term. And he still may. But if Romney continues to be as poised and polished and as professional a candidate, I think that he, in all likelihood, will win the presidency in 2012. So the way I had the scorecard in the last debate, I put Romney at 1, Cain and Paul tied for second, Gingrich would be third, Bachmann fourth, Gary Johnson fifth, Santorum, Huntsman, and then Perry. In the previous debate, Fox as opposed to CNN, I thought Bachmann won that because she really shook to the core Perry and pounded him, pulverized him. Romney had a pretty good night. Ron Paul actually had a pretty decent night. So in that one, I had it Bachmann, Romney, Paul, Gingrich, Cain, and the rest of the pack. But Cain's been right there. He's a likable guy. He's the problem solver. He's practical. And he's not too extreme for many in the Republican Party. But nobody, even Ron Paul, will not call him out on his ties to the Federal Reserve. And also, I have deep concerns when you're too tied to corporate America. I'm not talking about small business. I'm not talking about, entrepreneurship. I'm not talking about free enterprise. I'm talking about the corporate conglomerates. And so that is my main issue. Now, the 999 plan doesn't sound so bad. It didn't take a rocket scientist. I've said all along, and it's no mystery science. If the Bible talks about tithing 10% to the Creator God, how could the state, how could anybody else require more of you? If God is supreme in your life, how can a corporation, a governmental corporation, or any of its agencies or agents, how could they require you to pay more, whether it's federal, federal or the national government, or the state or local, or anyone else? Otherwise, then you're putting these interests above God. And I take great umbrage with that. Okay, Huntsman is trying to say, I'm Mr. Moderate. I'm your fallback guy. And I'm the one with the experience. And he's got the look of a president. But it's his facial expressions that are quite disturbing. I remember when he tried to attack, and he didn't even mean it because he kind of snickered. When someone snickers, they generally don't mean it. Okay? That's the way I see it. So when he snickered and said that that Romney, and I think he was attacking him for his hypocrisy, or Perry for some of his stands, and he said that he thought he was treasonous or traitorous. I think maybe it had to do with the border, something along those lines. I don't remember the exact, because he's almost forgettable, sort of like Palente. But he's gotten a few jabs in there. And then Gary Johnson, okay, so he's a pothead. So, that is not a major issue of mine. I think decriminalization is absolutely the answer. Legalization, I have question marks, and I just haven't spent enough time on the issue. But yeah, he's very libertarian-like. And yes, I guess he borrowed from Limbaugh that joke. At least that's what seems to be the facts and evidence. But nevertheless, I don't know why a libertarian and a freedom kind of guy would ever want to use anything similar, if not the same, and unless you're quoting him and use it as your own. But it doesn't really matter. About the dog and the creating jobs and the shovel ready job. It doesn't matter. Okay, Santorum, if you lose as an incumbent, as a United States Senator from the great state, the Keystone State of Pennsylvania, the state of independence. I like that on license plates. Although there shouldn't be no... See, isn't it kind of ironic? You have all these patriotic mottos for the states, and then you come to realize that a license is granting privilege to something that's a divine right, and it's something that would otherwise be considered illegal or unlawful. And how could travel, or the right to travel, be considered that? And so you have all these great mottos, sort of like "In God We Trust" on the Federal Reserve note, when the Federal Reserve note is an abomination. I mean, it's sacrilegious to even think that God would condone. More importantly, he would condemn vehemently any association that relates to equating paper, fiat currency with no substantial backing, actually no backing whatsoever, and thinking God would give that a blessing or his stamp of approval. It's lunacy, But again, that's the way I see it. So the problem solver, Mr. Practicality, and Mr. Likability is really catching on. Again, just like when Pat Buchanan had the mojo and the momentum against King George President George Bush Sr., the Republican status quo, the hierarchy, said, we will not allow him to be our president. Now, they can work with Herman Cain. When Herman Cain, wasn't Herman Cain, when they asked about the VP question, and I think he said that Newt Gingrich, I remember the ones that were trying to be diplomatic and they didn't want to slight anybody and mention anybody, or was it Santorum? But I think both of them kind of mentioned Newt Gingrich would make for a good VP, and they had a lot of compliments and praise for the devil incarnate, Newt Gingrich. Now, Newt Gingrich would probably be a very interesting history or political science professor, and he taught college, and so beyond being an instructor, a lecturer, and a writer of books, and a political charlatan. What's he good at? Oh, philandering, I guess. I don't know. I've never talked to the women about what kind of servicing he does, or how equipped, or how emotional and psychological and physically ready he is as a companion or partner. But hey, that's not for me to explore, and I don't really care. But yes, he is known as a philanderer, like the philanderer-in-chief, former President Bill Clinton. But he is coming across as the adult in the room, someone that is the sage, who has the knowledge, who's been there, and he was Speaker of the House. Remember, that's that's a pretty, in terms of presidential pecking order. If a calamity occurs, if there's a tragedy, let's say tragic circumstances arise, it's president, vice president, and then Speaker of the House. So he did hold a very high office, and even though he left in a disgraced manner, and some say, well, it's sort of like Jim Wright. It wasn't that big a deal in book deals, and he was a wheeler dealer, and he did things that were considered unethical, and that closed out his speakership and his service in the House of Representatives as a congressman. Okay, but let's get to this Herman Cain character. I've already exposed the Federal Reserve connections. I've already exposed his cozy relationship with corporate America. So they're the issues I have with Herman Cain. But in the straw poll, after the GOP debate, which I don't believe he won the debate, but he scored some major points, and I thought he came across quite well. But see, the problem is Perry was pathetic. Perry performed well under par, and his positions, are not resonating well with the Tea Partiers, at least now. And those that are into borders, language, and culture, except I don't know when Michael Savage is going to renounce his support for Rick Perry when he's a violator of those principles. See, some people don't think through their advocacy for someone. They don't think through. They look at the surface. It's like an impulse buy, and I think he's going to regret those statements. But again, he's made other asinine statements, even though he's highly intellectual and many times very incisive in his critiques, his analysis, and his overview of the political scenery and the political landscape. Okay, back to Herman Cain. The reason he did so well in the straw poll in Florida, Rick Perry did so poorly, and Rick Perry assumed victory, and he didn't work that territory. He didn't work, he didn't put the time and energy into it, where Herman Cain remained in Florida and continued to work it. So I feel, based on my research, that those delegates, or those that were represented in the straw poll in Florida, that they felt slighted, dished, if you will. And so when Romney moves on, Perry moves on, and they don't stay there and work that base, they were punished for that, especially Rick Perry. So poor performance, and then moving on to new pastures didn't resonate so well. And this was completely unpredicted. I mean, this was a wild card and totally unexpected. I mean, wildly so. So Herman Cain finishes with 37% of the vote, while Perry trailed with 15, Mitt Romney at 14. So basically, you could say they kind of tied. So Mitt Romney caught up to Perry, and Cain leapfrogged in a gigantic way over the two front runners. Then you had Rick Santorum that drew 11%, Ron Paul at 10.5. So Santorum and Ron Paul, in my view, would be considered a statistical tie in that straw poll. And then former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, he came in at 8.5%. And then Huntsman. Now, Michelle Bachmann, she got crushed. And this must have really crushed her hopes. I mean, she is plummeting. I mean, it's just like whatever momentum she had. It's almost like after you see someone a few times, like when she held up better than, say, a Palin, and she held up better than expected, and she was a firebrand, and so that fiery nature and their Tea Party principles, all those things, that fighting spirit, took her to that level. But after that, people, they assume that that's the way she is. There's a higher level of expectation when you get into the top tier, and if you don't outperform good performances and you come in almost, and I'm not saying she phoned it in, it's really difficult to top. And she had two very good performances in previous debates, and it's like this Tea Party profile, if you will, or the campaign to settle in or settle on a candidate, it's still pretty wide open. And especially after Perry, it's almost like Perry slammed the door on their fingers, and they're saying, ouch, we're not going to take this kind of abuse. When he disrespected them and essentially accused anyone that wouldn't allow for his so-called Texas Dream Act, if you will, to allow illegal immigrants, the offspring, the children, which are no longer children now after you reach 18 years of age and you're in college, and some of them are beyond 18 years of age that are going to college. And University of Texas at Austin is a top tier state university, and many people in neighboring states, or those that don't have meet the residency requirements, but are American citizens. Let's say they just moved in from the other 49 states. They would not be permitted to cash in on the much lower in-state tuition. But illegal, the offspring, and they're considered still illegal immigrants, illegal aliens. And so when Rick Perry says, "Oh, you're heartless," what do you mean? They're heartless. I mean, that's patently absurd. I mean, and then he says it's a ridiculous notion that you could build a fence and keep people out. How? That's ridiculous. Okay, so if you're trying to erect a barrier, let's just say that against flooding, or against, I mean, you essentially have to just say, I capitulate. We never erect barriers, boundaries, borders. It's like with your children. Okay, so let them just rummage, let them roam into any cabinet, any outlet, anything that's available to them. When you there's a thing called protection, and there's nothing wrong with protectionism, and so we should be protecting our sovereign. It should be. Well, I shouldn't say. How can I put it? Well, in terms of national sovereignty, you have to have borders. I don't know if the word sovereign is right, but you have to have clear-cut borders and boundaries. They have to be protected. Otherwise, you're not a nation. So part of your nationality is protecting one's borders, one's culture, one's language, those kinds of things, as Savage talks about, which is true. And then Perry being tired. I mean, Ron Paul has got him by a dozen years, and he still is pretty, cogent. Now, again, he does ramble a bit, but he rambled when he was in his 50s when I knew him, and back in Texas. I mean, that's just his communication style. I don't think it's dementia. I don't think it has anything to do with his specific age. I just think that's his communication style. He just happens to ramble, and he doesn't always stay on point. But I'll tell you what, someone I think's been coaching him lately, because he's got better punchlines. They're more concise. They are more cogent, and quite frankly, they're more. He's answering the question. It's sort of like putting in the right punchline to the question asked, rather than veering off of subject matter. So he's more on point, and he's more present. But Rick Perry, he's just got in. Why is he tired? Why is he mentally, not up to the task? And now they're saying, well, he was never really a great debater. Well, George Bush was never really a great debater, but at least he looked like he was, present, and he had a certain amount of energy. And I think they're right about the same age. Now, of course, George Bush finished his term and they're the same age now. So he was, 10, 12 years younger when he was campaigning for president of the United States first go round. But whatever the case might be, imagine Christie. Now, Christie, I mean, he does a lot of campaigning, he's doing a lot of talks throughout the nation. I don't know how well his heart and his health will hold up during a very vigorous and a very stressful and very demanding campaign. His brother and others are signaling that even though there was some reconsideration, he's not getting in. If he were to get in, it would be a great time for him. Now, if Perry was polling stronger, and if Perry was performing up to par in these debates, Christie would not be considering or reconsidering. But when Roger Ailes and the Republican higher ups, are lobbying you, almost trying to intimidate you, not just encouraging, but they're almost saying that you're forsaking the party, you're forsaking the country, and so there's a lot of pressure being placed on Christie to get in. Now, I'm not talking about Ann Coulter, and Coulter-Geist. No, not at all. But she is a big cheerleader for Christie. Now, I like someone that is frank, blunt, and it's kind of no holds barred. Don't hold your punches. You always know where someone stands, and that's kind of being part of the Northeast. Now, I like to think of my own demeanor and the way I express myself as assertive but not aggressive. But there's a fine line, and it's a matter of perception. But you have to be very careful that you can cross that point of no return, where people feel that you're too aggressive, and that you become obnoxious. And I don't think that, I have to say that there's some likable traits and qualities about Christie, and being kind of a no nonsense kind of guy. And it's almost like I'm not sure. I don't. He might be a Rutgers grad. I'm not certain. But But anyway, a lot of the governors of New Jersey, and not all of them. I mean, some of them Princeton graduates as well. But whatever the case might be, Christie is an attractive candidate, not physically, but I mean in terms of that approach. It's sort of like he's kind of got this blue collar thing going on, but he's got the white collar mentality, or I should say intellectual firepower, because he is an educated guy. I mean, he was a United States attorney, which that is troubling. Not as troubling in my view as someone who has served in a high post at the Federal Reserve. So my guess is he's not getting in. He's going to strongly consider it, and I think that he will consider a VP position, and then catapult into perhaps a presidential race. But I think he would consider being a VP. Well, because if someone is already the front runner, it's already become the nominee for the party, then all you have to do is campaign for 2-3 months, and you can still be the governor. And if you lose, well, it wasn't your race to lose. I mean, they're not going to blame you if let's say it's Romney, which in all likelihood it will be Romney. They're going to blame Romney, and Romney, he will not run again. That'll be it if he loses to Obama, and Obama is a second termer. So that's some political prognosticating here. That's my forecasting. That's the political scorecard. That's some of the takeaways. Now, what else did I want to get to? We're going to do a 40-minute report here that'll combine with the previous 20-minute for our affiliates and for our stream partners. Okay, Herman Cain leads political field. Now, this is not just a straw poll. Remember, he garnered 37%. That is huge. And as Rick Perry so aptly put, Florida determines presidents. Now, his wording might have been a little bit differently, but they're deciders many times of who's going to become the president of the United States. So Florida is crucial. Now, this is a Zogby poll. Zogby's pretty good with their polling data. It says a new Zogby poll puts Herman Cain at the top of the Republican field as the top choice. 28% of the polling respondents. Now, it says rounding out the top three are Rick Perry at 18, Romney at 17. So again, they're statistical tie. Fourth place goes to Ron Paul at 11%. So really, I could almost put Ron Paul in third place. Those two aforementioned in the second place. Let's see, how does the rest of the field shape up here? For whatever reason, let's see. Okay, Michelle Bachmann is slipping steadily, chugging in at 4%. Wow, and this is not just in a single state. This is an overall snapshot of Republicans and likely voters in the Republican primaries. Where else do we got? They don't give all the stats for all the candidates. I guess you have to go to Zogby and get all how everybody else fared. But so fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you view it, Michelle Bachmann is plunging. Perry is in perilous times I mean, he was double Romney. I mean, he was far and away above the pack. I mean, Romney was a solid, steady second after Bachmann had fallen off, and she was a very distant third. But now she's at the middle, maybe even lower than the middle of the pack, 4%. So with 28%, Herman Cain. Wow, that's putting him 10% above Perry and Romney. That's incredible. So, I've talked about some of the reasoning, some of the rationale for that, And you guys can do your own figuring. But that's some pretty incredible numbers. And he cannot be dismissed. But then again, look at where we were when Michelle Bachmann hit it out of the park. I believe it was the second debate. Might have been the first. I think it was the South Carolina debate. And then she picked apart Perry and seemingly was rebounding and setting herself up nicely for Perry's fall. And Romney has become this more polished and this more professional candidate, and even has a little bit of pizzazz. But boy, whoever his handlers are, these consultants, we're talking media-wise, and his debate instructors, and maybe his life coaches, and they're getting the job done. And Herman Cain, I don't think he has. I mean, he might, because of his Federal Reserve connections and corporate America, but I think he was this dark horse candidate that they knew they could work with, and they can work with. And he's very close with Newt Gingrich, very close with the corporate tycoons, and of course even the media, because remember, he was a highly rated radio talk show, so they don't talk about much in his resume and background. In a very big major market station, WSB, and he's also very closely aligned with Neil Boortz. Now remember, Neil Boortz is a nationally syndicated radio host, also has that WSB Atlanta flagship radio station presence. And so you've got him pushing, and so he's got a base of support, and now it's going to even grow much larger. And you may have a lot of Republicans saying, you know what? Why can't we market this guy being a black American, very reasonable, not extreme. I mean, there's no extreme statements. I don't call it extreme when you talk about Social Security and some of those things, but he's just basically saying, I can help you. I can help Middle America, and I can even help the impoverished get back to work. I have a plan. I'm reasonable. I'm seasoned, but I'm not part of the beltway of politics. And so here's Mr. Businessman. It's sort of like a Ross Perot in a way, but not sounding nutty or goofy and not looking like an ass clown. And so he's got an appeal. And with a country with admitting to well over 10% unemployment rate, more likely 30% when you factor in the chronically unemployed and the underemployed. I think that you put an authentic black candidate who is obviously conservative, has the business credentials, and you don't have the flip-flopping, you don't have the hypocrisy, you don't have the baggage of Romney. I think this guy could end up being the alternative to Romney, but still having the business savvy and the resume, the credentials to simply, I think he's going to be. I mean, if I don't now, if the Tea Partiers rally around Herman Cain, and there's no other late entries into the race, and Bachmann has fallen off, and apparently so. And I can't imagine. I mean, Bachmann had her. She already shined. She peaked out. Okay, and now she's at a precipitous, downfall. I mean, it's sort of like when you reach the pinnacle of your power. And now she's got this precipitous plunge underway. I don't think she can recover from it. And it's like these little minor and sometimes even major gaffes. And I think that people have just tired of her. And maybe I think there's not a level of confidence, sort of like what it's like. She's a brighter Palin, if you will. She's a little more polished and sophisticated, and she's taken more seriously, but not seriously enough. Now you have to remember, in the Republican Party, it is possible that there is that, she's a woman. Okay? And even though Palin was a VP candidate, I don't think the Republican nation, if you will, is ready to fully embrace, fully accept someone like Bachmann. Now, with the exception of Ron Paul, I would say that she should be the more viable candidate for Republicans that truly are social conservatives, fiscal conservatives, healthcare conservatives. I don't know if anyone's brought that up, but there should be another category. Because, sadly to say, I don't know of any others that are talking about full-scale repeal, not just tweak and replace, but full-scale repeal. And if there's a replacement, it would have to be something that's voluntary and something that would be state-based. And so really there's no federal mandate, there's no federal anything as it relates to health care. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the coming debates, in the coming days. I've said all along, Palin is not getting in. There were some glimmers of hope for those that are interested in Christie, but I don't think he's going to crash the party, even though so many want him to. But boy, I'll tell you, there's a lot of pressure being placed on him from Roger Ailes, the Fox Follies, from GOP higher-ups, because of how pathetic. I mean, how just, it's one thing to say mildly meeting expectations, but when you don't even come close to meeting expectations, when you are so far afield from meeting expectations, and then not only do you have abysmal performances, but then you turn those that were most interested in Perry, when you don't want to secure the borders, and when you support a proponent of siding with the criminal illegal aliens. So you're saying keep the borders open, and not punish, but actually reward offenders or the offspring of the offenders. And then those that actually are residents, state sovereign citizens, saying, hey, we're going to override parents, we're going to override the legislature, I'm the executive, I'm the king, I'm going to be the tyrant, and I'm going to mandate injections into your teenage girls. And then if you're a social conservative, you're saying, wait a minute, you're kind of insinuating that my teenage daughters are going to be sexually active. And you've decided to be the parent, the big brother, which is a no-no. By the way, I hope that you've checked out the website, TomDonahueReports.com, TomDonahueReports.com. Lots of updates, new health page, check it out. And always remember, if you want to be a free subscriber to this program, you want the advanced copy of this report and any and all reports, they'll go right to your email inbox. And you can click on that at your earliest convenience, or just go directly to tomdonahue.podomatic.com or Tom Donahue Reports. Anyway, you know the drill. We have the Podomatic player. Everything's available to you right there at the site. The archives, the embedded player, the Ustream, the health page, news resources, and all info relating to this program. So make sure you check out TomDonahueReports.com or TomDonahue.podomatic.com. Till we meet again, may God bless you. God bless this great country. I'm still an optimist as it relates to America American exceptionalism, and just all things Americana.